Rules Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Today we will consider two important bills from the Science Committee, H.R. 1029, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, and H.R. 1030, the Secret Science Reform Act of 2015. H.R. 1029 reforms the Science Advisory Board by strengthening public participation and improving the process for selecting expert advisors and expanding transparency requirements. The bill protects jobs by helping to ensure that scientific advice is balanced and unbiased. H.R. 1030 requires the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, to base its regulations on science that is available to the public and subject to independent verification. This is a transparency bill that simply asks the EPA to show its work before implementing regulations that cost billions of dollars and destroys jobs. I want to thank Chairman Lamar Smith, the gentleman from San Antonio, Texas, Bexar County, for his leadership on these bills, not only as chairman, but for leading the Science Committee in these endeavors. And I am delighted also to see that we'll be joined by the gentleman, the former chairman of the Agriculture Committee, who evidently is up here at some point to give some testimony, as well as the Honorable Catherine Clark. Catherine, welcome to the Rules Committee. Is this your first time up here? It is, Mr. Chairman. As the old saying goes, good luck. I want you to know that I think you're going to be fine. We haven't had anybody do anything silly up here lately. Well, not in the last couple days. Anyway, I'm delighted that you're here, not since yesterday. And before, I'm going to defer here at this time, if I can, to the ranking member, my dear friend, the gentlewoman from New York, for any opening statements you might like to make. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you. I don't have any. Welcome to you both.
You know, normally she brings pie. If it's a good day, we get some kind of cherry pie. If it's not, it's rhubarb. And I'll let you figure out the difference, but I think most days we get good stuff from Louise. Thank you very much. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered to the record.
Mr. Chairman, I've...
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, sir. I have been part of this committee and wonderfully so and appreciative, but I keep hearing about these pies.
Well,
there are days, and especially in the last little bit, rhubarb sounds like a dream. So, you know, whichever, I want to find out about these pies that you keep talking about, because I'm sitting over here and we'll have to find out one day about them.
The secret handshake goes with it.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to get into that.
all you've gotten is pizza up to now, so we'll get the pie. But I do want you to know and acknowledge to the committee the gentleman, my dear friend from Oklahoma, the former chairman of the Agriculture Committee, who spent weeks up here at a time. Mr. Lucas has also joined us, and I'm delighted that you're here. But what I wanted to say real fast is Lamar Smith, the young chairman, has a markup going on in judiciary, so we're going to let him give his statement, that answer questions if we can real quickly, and then Ms. Clark, we're going to stay after you, but are you okay to stick around? Great. The gentleman from San Antonio as well is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say that Mr. Lucas will be speaking on the Science Advisory Board bill, and I will be speaking on the Secret Science Reform Act. And I thank you for mentioning the judiciary markup going on right now is actually marking up a bill of mine, and we have several more amendments, and they are waiting for me to return. So I'm going to put my opening statement in the record, if that is all right, and go straight to answer.
Without objection, I'll be entered.
Let me just take 30 seconds to give a quick summary of this bill. And what this bill does basically is to require the Environmental Protection Agency to use publicly available data that is verifiable, the scientific method. It's not picking and winning, or picking choosers and winners and losers and what's good and what's bad. We all believe in clean water, we all believe in clean air, but what it is saying is that the EPA, before it can issue any regulations, need to be basing its regulations on the best available science. This so happens is supported by 90% of the American people, and in fact, the President's own science advisor testified before the Science Committee that this data should be made public. or it should be publicly available. So that's all this bill does. It doesn't make a value judgment on regulations itself. And by the way, it is only prospective. It doesn't change any current environmental laws, so you can rest assured in that score as well. But, Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, I'll answer questions about the bill in case there are some.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, if I can, ask the Democrats if they have any questions for Chairman Smith. Are there any Republicans that have questions for Chairman Smith? Gentleman's recognized.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I don't think Mr. Cole's in order, Mr. Chairman.
Well, what the gentleman doesn't know is he's for Yale.
Mr. Chairman,
That's all right. I went,
these are the same bills we
Jump
did
strike down.
last year, right?
that's correct.
Okay, then, same questions I had last time.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I went to Yale too, so we share that. But in October, not so much.
I represent UT.
Mr. Smith, thank you for taking time to come to the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr.
The gentleman is now excused, and Ms. Clark, we're going to let you go ahead and own the dais here, and you're recognized.
Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, and members of the committee. I'm here to testify today on H.R. 1029, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act, and H.R. 1030, the Secret Science Reform Act, both of which passed the Science Committee along party line votes. My Democratic colleagues and I have serious concerns about the effects of these bills on the EPA's ability to protect public health and the environment. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have pursued these bills in the name of increasing transparency in EPA's regulations. This is a laudable goal, but neither of these bills reform the EPA's processes for the better. Instead, they distort them in a way that will undermine the scientific integrity of EPA's decision-making and needlessly risk the health of Americans. To start with H.R. 1029, this bill prioritizes the interests of industry over the expertise of our nation's top academic researchers, conflating bias with financial conflict of interest and undermining the credibility of the board. H.R. 1029's new and burdensome disclosure requirements will make it more difficult for academic experts to serve as board members, while simultaneously making it easier for people with financial conflict of interest to serve. Moreover, the bill adds burdensome and unnecessary requirements to the public comment process, which will lead to needless delay of public health protections. While my colleagues on the Science Committee had some of their amendments adopted during the committee consideration of H.R. 1029, the flaws in the bill remain. For that reason, I am requesting an open rule that will provide all members with the opportunity to change this legislation for the better. I'd like to turn to H.R. 1030, the Secret Science Reform Act. This bill will prohibit the EPA from relying on the best and most relevant science as part of its rulemaking process, effectively preventing the EPA from protecting public health. The bill does this by limiting the data the EPA can consider to only data which is publicly available in a form that allows for, quote, substantial reproduction of research results. This sounds like a reasonable requirement, but it will in fact prevent the EPA from using much of the best available science in public health by prohibiting the use of peer-reviewed studies with confidential health information. Some of my colleagues have suggested that this data can be easily de-identified to protect confidentiality and privacy, but this is not true. According to the American Statistical Association, de-identification methods often do not suffice to protect confidentiality. Statisticians and computer scientists have repeatedly shown it can be possible to link individuals to publicly available sources, even with personally identifiable information removed. The end result will be to require the EPA to violate current law and publicly disclose health information of study participants, or to pretend the study and the relevant research results do not exist. Neither choice is acceptable, and any bill that limits scientific information that the EPA can consider as the basis for its regulations should not be passed by the House. Because of those concerns, I am requesting an open rule on H.R. 1030. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question. Mr. Lucas, do you intend to represent the committee on the second amendment, on the second bill that is here, the advisory board? All right, and I believe you've spoken on both of those.
Spoke to both, right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have you please join us and engage in this endeavor with us. Frank, we're delighted that you're back here. The Rules Committee, it's obvious that we didn't treat you as poorly as we thought we did, that you wanted to come back for more.
Mr. Chairman, rarely have I had so much fun as I had on the various meetings with this great panel over the course of 2.5 years, and I'm privileged to be back here and to have my old colleague from the Ag Committee flying side pilot, and whenever it'd be appropriate for some opening comments, if that would be appropriate on 1029, I'll
In
offer
fact,
those,
without
Mr. Chairman.
objection, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record, and the gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I simply want to thank the committee for the opportunity to be here, and thank Chairman Smith and former Science and Environment Subcommittee Chairmans Andy Harris, Chris Stewart, and Dave Schweikert for their hard work on this comprehensive legislation brought over from the last Congress. H.R. 1029 ensures that the best experts are free to undertake a balanced and open review of regulatory science. The EPA Science Advisory Board was created in 1978 to provide independent expert advice on scientific and technical information that justifies federal regulations and important policy decisions. But the original law had very few details. So in recent years, the shortcomings of the process have risen. There have been limited public participation. Some have concerns that the agency has interfered with the expert advice and potential conflicts of interest. If the agency undermines the board's independence or prevents it from providing sound advice to Congress, the valuable advice these experts can provide is wasted. As we rely more and more on science to help inform policy decisions, it becomes critical that the board be free to function as intended. The board's independence must be strengthened so the public can have confidence in the policy decisions are not just being hijacked or manipulated under the guise of science. It's time to update the law to restore scientific integrity to the process and independence to the board. My bill would strengthen the important reforms started in the Farm Bill last summer. The Science Advisory Board Reform Act addresses the remaining shortcomings by ensuring a well-balanced, objective expert panel, increased transparency, more public participation, a reinforced responsiveness to Congress, and this will empower the experts to provide powerful and unbiased scientific information to all of us. And the bill ensures those uncertainties and scientific conclusions are clearly communicated, allows the expert panels to focus on science. Bottom line is this, Mr. Chairman. The Environmental Protection Agency has the authority over things that control virtually every facet of our life, every facet of our business, some might even say every facet of our existence. This science board was set up in 1978 to be able to provide second party, third party, whatever term you want to use, analysis of their decisions so that we as Congress could respond in an orderly and appropriate fashion. What this bill attempts to do is to take that concept and make it more workable. After all, when an agency spends $100 million or so on research information, there might be some legitimate concerns that that research information might reflect some of the perspective of the people paying the bills. The goal of this is simply to make sure the public and a variety of scientific sources have the ability to provide their input. And I would note to all my friends in this room, whatever your perspective may be about how the agency conducts itself now, you may think it's the most wonderful thing in the world, and you may think it has many flaws. But if you think it's wonderful right now, 22 months from now, we may well have a change in administration, a change in leadership at the EPA. The standards that are in this bill may be your best tool and friend down the road. So I simply say to all my friends, we all have a responsibility to improve and enhance the quality of the science. Let's make sure this 1978 law works efficiently and effective, and I would ask for a limited number of amendments. As the chairman knows, I've been through this body many times with unlimited amendments. It's a lot of fun. But 100 or 200 amendments is just a bit more than probably the House needs right at this moment. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. By the way, I like your wingman. The gentleman from Minnesota is not up here as much as he should be here, and we're delighted that you have brought him back up here. Mr. Peterson's a very dear friend of mine, and of this committee. Mr. Lucas, I'm going to start with you, the first question. I thought I was going to go to Ms. Clark, but I'm not. I need to just understand this. About the bill which you speak of, which was still about the scientific board, it's still about science, and also Chairman Smith spoke about the secret science, what is called the secret science bill. When the EPA, through its scientific endeavors, makes a decision, is this bill all about just tell us the mathematics or the science behind how you came up with your determination?
I think that's a reasonable way to describe 1029. The Science Board set up in 1978. It is to look at the science. It is to verify the science. It is to have parties outside of EPA offer their analysis. It's trying to give us a more complete picture of when we have to make our decisions based on the actions of a very important and very powerful agency.
So if it sounds science, then people can come up with generally the same answer.
I would just simply say this.
If that's what you base it on.
I would say simply, Mr. Chairman, my training is in agricultural economics. I define that in some ways more of an art than a science. But I suspect in any substantial group of scientists looking at any set of issues from the same perspective, there might be almost as many different opinions as there would be on this committee. That's just a given part of it. But that's why it's important that we strengthen the Science Advisory Board to make sure that when they offer a picture, a perspective, an analysis of a proposal, a decision, a process underway, that we can all have comfort together. While your neighbors and my neighbors trust you and trust me greatly, there is an inherent suspicion out there across the countryside in everything government. That's not just the legislative branch, but the executive branch, and this is an effort to restore that confidence.
Well, science should be, if you're going to do math in your science, it ought to be shared, and I agree with you. Ms. Clark, I've got a question. You referred to, well, these changes that are taking place might mean that somebody would serve on a board, might not serve on a board now. And I looked at the list that was proposed that's in the legislation. Is that lobbyists that you would you like lobbyists to be able to serve on these boards, which they're not allowed, or what is your objection when you spoke of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My real concern is over the change in requirements around financial disclosure. Currently, if there is a conflict of interest that arises, that is disqualifying you from service on the board.
Can you give me one example?
Well, you know, I can't give you a specific example, but
How about make one up?
Make one up. All right. You are a tobacco company that is looking at, that may have a financial interest in regulations that are being decided before the board, and that may be disqualifying of you. Under
So
this,
you'd like them included?
this would just require disclosure, and I think that we should keep the exclusion of people with financial conflicts of interest in this legislation.
Oh, so it's doing the reverse. It's meaning you
It's
do
doing the
not have to
reverse.
provide financial information.
That's right. It's just disclosure, but it no longer bars
So
you
it's
from
the
service.
reverse of what might be excluding. It's allowing someone to be included that you might want to have known a little bit more about them.
That's right.
Okay, I'm sorry. I took it the reverse. I'm sorry. I thought you were saying people would be excluded. You're now saying there might be people included as opposed to excluded that we might need to know more about.
And I think, I don't mean to be confusing, but also there
Well,
are
that's the way I took it.
some additional requirements for academics who are serving on this board that may actually preclude experts in the field from, and we could further supplement with specifics about some of those requirements if you would so
I
desire.
think I've gotten a little closer to understanding. Mr. Chairman?
Simply, Mr. Chairman, as long as the participants under the bill acknowledge to the administrator, the public, and the appointment board what their potential interest issues are, then in the bill you basically are eligible. But why deny good scientific minds, good backgrounds, as long as everyone knows where they're coming from and what their issues are. Disclosure, Mr. Chairman. In the committees I serve on, we have disclosure forms if you testify
Help me
before the
understand
committee.
this. I just heard Ms. Clark say they're not required to do that. You're now saying they do have to do it.
My perspective is that we should open up to as many people as possible the ability to input into this process, but let's make sure we know where they come from. Let's make sure everyone
That's the
knows
transparency.
what's going
Well,
on.
I wanted to look at it. I will tell you, I asked our crack staff deal, and I had to go all the way to my lawyer, Kyle Matus, to see if I could figure out these roll call votes that were done in the committee, and I'm going to do my homework a little bit better. I'm not clear based upon our testimony that we've got today. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Congresswoman Clark for being here today. She told me earlier that this was going to be her first time in the Rules Committee meeting, and I told her I'd dress the same way she did to give her some comfort for that.
She asked for help, and I said, Virginia, you're 2 minutes late.
I know, I missed the chance to do it. And I want to thank my friend, the former chairman of the Ag Committee, for being here, and I appreciate your comments. I have no questions.
Gentlewoman yields back time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lucas, good to see you again, and Catherine, welcome to the committee. We all deal up here. I sometimes come away from here feeling like everybody wants to say, I'm not really a scientist, but I play one on television, or I play one in Congress. I mean, this is so far afield, though, gentlemen. Look, if a great scientist owned a corporation and he wanted to affect what was happening on the board, I would not want him on that board. And people who had blatant conflicts of interest, even an inventor who had something who was trying to get an edge, I would not want them on that board. I think the whole notion here, the conflict of interest part of it is really very serious to me. I hope it is to you, and I think it would be the rest of the country. But let me say what some real scientists have said here. That the Secret Science Reform Act, which actually collectively talking about the two bills, the misleading name bills would radically diminish the EPA's ability to protect the public health. Right there, that concerns me. Under the bills, the EPA would be required to ignore significant science, and the Scientific Advisory Board would be required to ignore conflicts of interest, and enforcement officials would be required to ignore pollution emitted in violation of the law. These are pretty serious charges. These bills are broadly written and would have damaging impacts far in excess of what their sponsors will admit. The Secret Science Reform Act is based on a faulty premise. Its notion of, quote, secret science, end quote, based on claims about studies that were conducted 2 decades ago, is unfounded despite lengthy congressional inquiries. The bill would deny EPA the ability to rely upon peer-reviewed medical studies that involve commitments to patient confidentiality, and when the agency carries out its statutory responsibilities to safeguard the public health and the environment. Further, the bill would effectively amend numerous environmental statutes by forbidding EPA to use certain kinds of studies in setting the health standards. In other words, we non-scientists would be telling them what they could do. It would also make it impossible for EPA to use many kinds of economic models that it routinely relies upon because those models are proprietary. This marks a radical departure from longstanding practices, and the end result would be to make it much more difficult to protect the public by forcing EPA to ignore key scientific studies. The Science Advisory Board bill would attack EPA's scientific process in a different way. The worst provision would mandate allowing the participation of scientists with financial conflicts of interest as long as the conflicts are just disclosed. This is inconsistent with a set of nearly universally accepted scientific principles to eliminate or limit financial conflicts. The bill would significantly weaken the content and credibility of these Scientific Advisory Board reviews. A textbook example of making a government program function poorly to the benefit of polluting industries at the expense of public health and independent science. The bill would add unnecessary new burdens to the board, distorting its mission, altering its process with no benefit to the EPA or to the public. The bill also significantly broadens the scope of the board and creates a comment process, adding needless delay to the board's work. The result would be further stalling and undermining of important public health, safety, and environmental protections. The legislation will obstruct the implementation, enforcement of critical environmental statutes, undermine EPA's ability to consider and use science, and jeopardize the public health. And for this reason, I urge you to oppose this bill. This is what real scientists are telling us about this. We've been through this one before. I know. I don't know if the Senate will take it up. Did they take it up before? I don't think so. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to put the administration's policy in for both of them. Like Alice in Wonderland, I know up here we're supposed to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast, but when it comes to real science, I can't do it. Sorry, I worked too hard to get a degree in microbiology and one in the public health. So thank you, but no thanks.
Good gosh. Is this the one-page, two-page bill that we're talking about, Secret Science Reform Act of 2015?
That's Chairman Lamar Smith's bill. I'm on H.R.
I know you are.
1029.
I know you are. I'm trying to make sure I got the
One
same one
page.
that the gentleman was speaking about. Mr. Cole? Mr. McGovern?
Welcome Chairman Lucas and my colleague Catherine Clark to the Rules Committee. I have the pleasure of serving on the Agriculture Committee as well with Chairman Lucas, and he and Mr. Peterson conducted that committee when Mr. Lucas was chairman in a very bipartisan way, and we're always accommodating to all the members, and tried very hard to, and achieved a farm bill. Unfortunately, I didn't support it, but I thought there were a lot of good things in the farm bill nonetheless. And that would not have happened without both Mr. Lucas and Mr. Peterson's diligent efforts. And, look, I just want to, I had asked Chairman Smith before whether these were the same bills we did last year. They were. These basically, I think, are identical statement of administration policies threatening vetoes that we saw last year. I don't think the Senate's going to do anything this year on this, and I'm not sure they're going to go anywhere. But I do have an amendment along with Congressman Kennedy is taking the lead on, and Ms. Clark is on that as well, which is an amendment that would ensure that EPA is able to use all peer-reviewed scientific publications. I don't think it's controversial, but I think a greater body of high-quality research will enable EPA to make well-informed public policy decisions, and I hope that I'd like an open rule, but I don't think we will get an open rule, but I hope that this amendment will be made in order. And just to say, to add on to what the ranking member said, I'm not a scientist, but I admire and I trust those who are to help guide us and make the very best policy possible. And sometimes I get the feeling that if the conclusion of the scientific community does not kind of fit whatever our special interest might be, we all of a sudden we bash scientists, we bash science. Science is science, and we ought not to do anything to water down science that is designed to protect the health and well-being of the general public. And so I have concerns about these bills, but the concerns are less so knowing that they're probably not going to go anywhere. So we'll have a good debate, and we'll see what happens, and I look forward to this coming to the floor.
Thank you very much. Does any other Democrat seek time? Mr. Polis, do you seek time? Evidently, do you have an amendment in here? We'll get to that one in a minute, but specifically for these witnesses. Any Republican have questions? Gentleman, George recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask one question to my Ag Committee Chairman. I'm reading the Statement of Administration policy, which does look strikingly familiar from last cycle. And it says that the president is focused on having the most knowledgeable and scientific and technical experts available, and he opposes requiring that state, local, and tribal governments be included, and is concerned about burdensome requirements that require the solicitation of and response to public comments. Knowing you as I do, I can't imagine that you have any interest in undermining the goal to have the most knowledgeable and scientific technical experts available. Was this, as it came through your committee, a concern?
Let me just say, Mr. Woodall, through the Farm Bill process, how many times did we get those letters about vetoing the bill that was ultimately signed into law? Every product is a work in progress. This is no different. But I would suggest to you, what's wrong with having the best and brightest scientific minds available participate with full disclosure, with full acknowledgement? Is that better than science projects being discussed at cocktail parties where nobody's a part of the discussion except a few years? This is transparency. This is bringing it up. This is putting everyone into the process, the public, everyone. If we're going to restore the faith of the American public, not just in Congress, but in the institutions of the federal government and all institutions underneath. Remember, the EPA is paying more than $100 million a year for these scientific studies. Then we need to do it in a way that will restore their confidence. Be proud of your research and your information and your conclusions. Be willing to confront the review of your peers and the public and the community. That's how we get back to where we should be. That's why I'm a part of this process. We'll see how the bill evolves. A few folks said a farm bill could never be done. Colin and I proved them wrong. Maybe we can make the Science Advisory Board a more functioning and more effective group too. Just might take a little while. Thank you, Mr. Woodall.
Well, when it comes to having the most knowledgeable technical experts available here on Capitol Hill, you certainly are in this area. I appreciate you being here with us today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm anticipating I'll get plenty of time to talk about this tomorrow, but I did just want to acknowledge Mr. Lucas being back at our committee. It's always a good time when you are here. We've enjoyed having you in the past, and certainly appreciate your being willing to come forward on this. Ms. Clark, welcome to the committee as well. I will say, having worked in other venues on similar issues before the Food and Drug Administration, sometimes the universe of people that understands something is vanishingly small. And if you exclude all of them by fiat, then by definition, you are going to have an advisory panel who knows nothing about that on which they're advising. So I thank the gentleman for bringing this to the committee. I thank you for once again enduring the Rules Committee process, and certainly look forward to seeing the bill on the floor tomorrow.
Mr. Collins?
I think I appreciate it, and I want to just reiterate my friend from Texas, what he just said. I think it's really interesting, though, when you look at a perspective, many times we have these conversations, and they're justifiable conversations between our side and the Democrat side. I think what's interesting about this, and what was read earlier, was the aspect of what is a burdensome requirement. We always talk about it from a Republican perspective. A burdensome requirement is something that gets in the way of people doing business and operating in a way that allows them to pursue and to do life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, business, dreams. In this interesting of the administration policy statement, what they find burdensome is public input. I think that's really interesting, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlemen, yields back his time. I would just like to note, I'm going to submit this to the record, the actual bill. The guts of this bill say the administrator shall not propose, finalize, or disseminate a covered area unless all scientific and technical information relied on to support such covered action is the best available science, specifically identified and publicly available online in a manner that is sufficient for independent analysis and substantial reproduction of research results. I just don't know how we could say it's going to cause the harm when, in fact, this could be a term paper for lots of people who go in and look at how the government does what it does. It could be used as science experiments all across our universe of secondary education and higher education, and you would find out what people who make law and make rules and regulations, how they base their science. We could build more people there. Without objection, I'm going to enter that into the record. I want to thank both of you for taking time to be with us today. It's very important not only for you who have survived your first chance here, Ms. Clark, but we hope we did well enough where you want to come back. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Please be nice to Mr. Peterson. In the future, bring him back also, because we like that guy from Minnesota. Thank you very much. Mr. Polis, do you wish to take the stand, or do you want to?
If I'm here,
Gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you. So my amendment certainly recognizes the need of bringing in outside experts to inform agency decisions. It also follows the federal government's, allows the federal government a depth and variety of knowledge we wouldn't have access to through our own resources. I think that's some of the goals of the bill. One category I think the bill actually leaves out in its search for experts are academics and other science and research-based institutions. I represent a district that has two of our state flagship universities, Colorado State University in Fort Collins, University of Colorado Boulder. A lot of great research and great expertise that can inform us further in these matters. And not to specifically solicit board's membership in these fields, as we do with others, could be a huge mistake, given that a lot of our foremost research comes out of some of the science being done at our institutions. CSU, for example, Colorado State University, is in the forefront of research in forest and rangeland stewardship. I've got to visit some of their experimental forest areas, cooperative fish and wildlife management, fire economic and management labs, geological resources, geospatial centroid, atmospheric and oceanic science. CU is a leader in aerospace. In fact, the MAVEN images of Mars, the Dream Chaser spacecraft, the microgravity science capabilities all came through our university. Biotech, ecology and environmental science. So I can think of no better or more advanced experts to advise our federal partners in policy and protocol decisions. And for this reason, I hope that my amendment is in order to make sure that some of the very best experts and very best scientists can get back on the EPA's Science Advisory Board so that the agency can be as well informed as possible with regard to the courses of action that it takes. I'm happy to yield for questions.
Ms. Post, thank you very much. I want to really thank you for your amendment. First of all, I sit on the Board of Trustees of my university, Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, and we have many, probably several as opposed to many, real experts in several different areas. And I would suspect to you that schools all across this country have a particular expertise in lots of areas that they're teaching our students, but they're also leading edge. And I agree with your amendment and your idea, and I want to thank you for bringing it today.
Thank you.
Does any member of the Democrat Party have a question?
I don't have a question, but
Gentleman is
I
recognized.
would like to ask unanimous consent to put in the statement of Representative Donna Edwards in behalf of her amendment, and I can sum it up. The Congressional Office cost estimate of the bill last Congress estimated it would cost the EPA $250 million a year to implement this bill, but the majority is telling EPA they can't spend more than $1 million for the implementation. To put the disparity in some perspective, CBO estimates implementing the bill would cost 25,000% more than the majority is providing. Thank you very much.
The objection will enter that into the record. Any further questions from your colleagues on your side? Seeing none, are there any questions from the Republican side? Thank you very much. I do not see where any member wishes to seek time. Thus, I will close the hearing portion of H.R. 29 and H.R. 30, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma, the gentleman, Chairman Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 1029, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act of 2015, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes in order as original text for the purpose of amendment and amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 114-10 and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in Part A, the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division on the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 1030, the Secret Science Reform Act of 2015, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 114-11, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
One amendment, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 1029 and 1030 open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer the amendments to the bills on the floor.
Appreciate the gentlewoman. The structured rule that's before the committee for H.R. 1029 and structured rule for 1030 includes numbers of amendments that members will be allowed to participate in, and I feel pretty good about it. I recognize what the gentlewoman's asking for, so further discussion. Vote now be on the slaughter amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No, the noes have it, noes have it. Is there further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it, the ayes. Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Aye. Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess, will be handling this for Republicans. And Judge Hastings for the minority. Not very often, but occasionally I have a member of my family up here. Nicholas has been up here a couple times. Alex, as you know, comes up on a regular basis. But Karen is not here as often. And Karen, I want to thank you for taking time to come, my wife, to come to a Rules Committee meeting. Her favorite member of Congress, Dr. Michael Burgess, is here. And so she, although I will...
She has such good taste.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I know what I am. I know what I am. Well, yesterday or the day before, whenever the gentleman from Georgia picked up the phone and called her on her birthday, Texas Independence Day, so he's in good stead around our household. That didn't give you any trouble, did you? No, I told you that was okay.
It's always nice to have Karen.
Yeah, it is always nice to have Karen. I want to thank the committee for its great work. I do not expect that we will have any more business this week, but we've done the best we can, and I appreciate everybody working together. He's now done with this work for the day.